What's happening, everybody? It's your boy Jimmy James 59 and brand new content for the channel. I have not done a video like this before, but I'm really excited to do it. Going to be doing a civilization concept overview, and today we're going to be looking at the Georgians, right? Now, why do a civilization concept video? Well, I think we're not done seeing civs added to the game, and because of that, it's worth thinking about what possible future civs will look like. I think videos like this are something of an idea repository for the development team. It lets the developers know what civs we want to see, give them a sense of maybe what we want them to look like, and honestly, I think there's no telling how helpful a video like this can actually be, just because I think the Age of Empires 2 community, from the developers and the pro scene down to kind of the community at large, I think is very close-knit, and ideas tend to travel quickly into a lot of different people, so who knows what the value of this video could be, but ultimately at the end of the day, hey, it's fun. Now, even though it's fun, doing this video actually took a lot of time, and I really had a good time with it, but what I want to really make sure is that you all have a good time watching this video. So I know you hear it in basically every YouTube video, but if you enjoy this video, it's really important that you either comment, like, subscribe, some combination of the three. It's basically the best way that you can give me feedback that you like this video and you want to see more videos like it. So definitely do that if that's how you feel. And if you don't feel that way, right, then I'll know if the video doesn't perform very well, and I read all the comments and I check all the data and the metrics on the videos. If the video doesn't do well, then I'll know that you're not that interested, or at least I'll think you're not that interested, and I'll probably reallocate my time to content that, maybe you enjoy a little bit more, hopefully. So what should the civ overview do? Basically, I want to say what the video isn't, first of all. It's not a proper historical account. I'm not a proper historian, and even though I did a bit of reading for this video, it was a lot more to inspire what I would think a civ like this would look like, because ultimately at the end of the day, this video is really just about how we would add Georgians to the game. And so I think a lot more about how the civ is balanced, what kind of units it has, what its tech tree looks like, etc. Now, the scenario editor is a little buggy these days. The new patch, I think, is going to correct some things with that, but that got rolled back, so I wasn't able to really mess around with it in that way. However, I do a lot of work crunching the numbers and giving you the arithmetic and the theory behind that sort of thing. So I think that the numbers on the units are actually going to be pretty reasonable and at least get us into the ballpark, right? So again, as I mentioned, right, we're not throwing out history. History is more of an inspiration for what the civ would look like. And now, why add the Georgians? Probably the most common civilization concept out there, and in doing the reading, right, it really made sense to me why. It's a really important player in world history and has actually a lot of unique attributes that I think we could make a civ with its own particular identity. So to just give you like a brief historical rundown, right, you can see, right, we're in the Caucasus region here in the map. We have a civilization, a kingdom here that is, really, flourishing, right, really making it for, many centuries, and had a reputation for martial valor, and that right there, I think, is a really nice aspect to incorporate into the civ, because hey, at the end of the day, like, this is a game about fighting in the Middle Ages. Now, one of the things I do want to stress, though, is that in addition to a sort of reputation for strong warriors, it's not just like a warrior culture, right? You have a kingdom that was pretty devout in its Christian religiosity, and that doesn't mean that there weren't other religions, or even that religious toleration wasn't a part of this kingdom at all. It just means that Christianity wasn't important. We would consider it, I think, part of the kingdom's identity. But you also have flourishing education, literature, arts as well. So you have a lot of nice sort of cultural aspects to the civ. It was invaded a lot of times, right? Notably, I think the Seljuk Turks were repulsed by the Georgians. A lot of well-known battles there, and eventually falling to the Mongols and their successors. Oh, and also the plague. Now, what should some of the themes of this civilization be? I think of this as kind of a late bloomer civ, right? Really kicking into gear around the turn of the millennium, and then jumping ahead really after that. So I think one of the themes of the civilization would be delayed gratification, right? You're going to want to try to get to the late game with this civilization in most instances. And so we want to build a civ, though, to make it interesting, right? To think about different ways to get there. Shepherding was definitely a skill of many villagers in the region, so we would want to somehow try to incorporate that. Again, thinking about those powerful military units, there's a lot of stories about the martial valor, I think, of the Georgian military. So we want to try and get that. And it's definitely a shock cavalry civ, but I think we can think with a little bit more diversity than that. But we want to make sure the heavy cavalry is good. Strong fortification should be an important part for repulsing invasions, and also find a way, right, that we can incorporate, right, that Christian identity that the kingdom was known for historically, as well, more generally, giving them a kind of sort of cultural emphasis as well, right, on that general level. And so, right, to summarize the Georgians, right, they're a civilization that's really you're trying to hang in there, so that way you can access those really powerful late game units. So I'm going to talk about the civilization bonuses here, and I'm going to run through all of them on one slide, but then I'll talk about them individually. So this is a cavalry and infantry civilization, and its bonuses are that when you research Loam, you instantly generate 2 sheep. Bloodlines is available starting in the Castle Age, but it grants plus 5 HP in the Castle Age and Imperial Age respectively. So ultimately, you end up getting 30 HP from Bloodlines. You have free building technologies, right, to improve the resiliency of your structures. Your Imperial Age technologies are discounted. You receive the Manaspa upgrade to Cavalier in lieu of Paladins. And your team bonus is that mounted units do plus 2 damage versus Camel Riders. So, researching Loam, right, generating sheep. The logic here is to factor in the role of shepherding and give them a modest economic, I don't even want to say boost, but just something to help out their economy a little bit in that early feudal age, and then have its emphasis really die out here. This does a few things, right? In terms of implications, if you want to play a bit more defensively, you can delay farms a bit because you're going to have a little bit more food. Maybe you can try to wall up. It'll probably help your opening just a bit, even though the follow-up to your opening in feudal age, it probably won't help with that as much, but maybe just a little bit of just trying to even things affording like double bit axe and things like that, while you're also maybe trying to rush. That's kind of what we're looking at here. And it also really helps mitigate against laming strategies. Again, the idea, right, if your shepherds are really good, then they're getting these sheep here. So that's it's a difficult civ to lame as effectively. Now, the Bloodlines bonus, right, is a really interesting one here, and we're really trying to reflect that late start. And what this does, right, is it makes, it makes you want to get out of the feudal age here, just because you don't have a ton of bonuses there, and we're really trying to make that feudal age less appealing, kind of acknowledge this sort of idea of a late start, but we also, right, want to make sure that the cavalry in the late game is good. And that's exactly what that does here. And so if you want to play with a bit more of an offensive style to try to get through the mid game, you can try to rely on those cavalry units that are going to have just a little bit more HP in the mid game, and they're going to have that plus 10 HP in the late game. Now, the defensive structures, again, right, we're trying to acknowledge some history here, and it has some interesting aspects in terms of gameplay, right? Trebuchet wars, which are pretty common in early Imperial Age, which the Georgians are supposed to be really kind of hit a high point for you there. You're going to be able to survive those much better. If you want to play a more defensive playstyle and wall up, that'll help you. If your town centers are under siege in the mid game, again, this will help those survive quite a bit. And even on close maps like Arena, right? Free fortified walls, that kind of thing, it's going to help you defend against things like castle drops. And so you can see some potential for this civ to play out both in open and closed maps. And the Imperial Age technologies getting discounted is really meant to try and capture that golden age, right? This idea of a flourishing society. And basically, it's just going to let us get to the units that we want to get to a lot quicker with their upgrades intact. And I do incorporate the Civ bonus here into any Imperial Age upgrade cost. So if you see something, you go like, huh, that's a little low. It's because we've already factored this. Now, the Manaspa being upgraded from Cavaliers, right? I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But basically, the idea is to really get them to their shock cavalry unit, make that something that's easily available, and hey, that means you can mass them from stables, right? So that's the important thing to take away. It's basically a paladin substitute. And so I'll talk about that in a sec. Mounted units doing extra damage versus camels. A lot of these civilizations that they had a lot of contact with and they fought against have access to camels in game. And the thing I think is worth thinking about here is that it's not only going to impact stable units but also cavalry archers. So it's not just affecting your heavy cavalry or your light cavalry, but light cavalry is still going to be pretty bad against camels. But I guess it'll be a little bit. So if we get to the unique units, right, the Manaspa, and I took some pictures here from the game to try to, I kind of try to match pictures with some things I found on the net. It's probably not perfect, so, but I don't know, it kind of works. But basically the Manaspa is, like I mentioned, is a paladin replacement, so its unit cost, its rate of fire, and its speed are the same. The amount of hit points it has once you factor in Georgian bloodlines is the same as a paladin. Really the difference here is that the Manaspa has one less melee attack, but one more melee armor. And you can also see, right, its upgrade cost is a bit cheaper, and that's because it's an Imperial Age upgrade. Okay, so how do these two units really hold up against one another and also compared to some other units? Well, head-to-head, this winds up being a draw, but it is worth noting that against some of the paladins with performance upgrades, like Franks, Lithuanians, once you collect enough relics and Teutons, the Manaspa is going to lose those one-on-one matchups. Now, the Manaspa is better versus heavy camel riders because of their team bonus, but on the other hand, Manaspa are not going to be as good as paladins versus halberdiers. And it's one of the things that we want to really consider here, right? So that heavy camels versus halberdiers, each one is killing one hit faster. You want to consider with the Manaspa that it is cheaper to upgrade though, right? Because remember, you're not just having to get to Manaspa, you have to research a lot of other things to get these guys fully upgraded. So it's going to be a little bit more cost efficient there. Paladin will be slightly better versus Arbalest because it has some higher DPS, but that's probably a bit more at the margins. So ultimately, comparable units. I think the takeaway to really remember is that the Manaspa is going to be more cost efficient to go for, but the really good paladin civs still might have an advantage over it if you're, up against one another. Now, the Tedzirelli swordsman, and by the way, I might be pronouncing some of these things wrong, so don't beat me up on the pronunciation. I can barely do my own name. But what we have here, right, is a fast-moving infantry unit that is kind of like a cataphract on foot. And you can see in the bonuses, a lot of bonuses going on here, but basically it has some anti-infantry armor, and it also has anti-camel and anti-cavalry damage. Now, again, the scenario editor makes it really difficult to test some of these things. So what I did was, instead of being able to look at like amount of HP remaining and things like that from direct testing, what I did was calculate the DPS between units that would be up against, right? So we're factoring in all the armor, firing rate, etc., and all those things into it, and basically assessing how long each unit takes to kill one another to determine essentially how the fights would basically go. So for instance, right, a Tedzirelli swordsman versus a knight. The knight's going to win 1v1 because, well, it's going to last a little bit longer. However, you got to remember this is still a pretty cost-efficient trade for the swordsman. Heavy camels are going to die outright, and the swordsman line is actually going to be able to defeat the Tedzirelli swordsman, but it's still going to be okay close. It's probably just off by maybe like, a hit or two, essentially. I think swordsmen have a rate of fire of 2 seconds, so basically you're kind of like dying 2 hits earlier. And now if we compare the elite version of the unit, again, we see it's a pretty decent comparison to Cavalier. Cavalier still win 1v1. Paladin's kind of a 2-to-1 ratio, but again, think about how many upgrades it takes to actually get to Paladin when we're thinking about cost efficiency. You'll defeat heavy camels fairly well, and the champion line will also win outright. Now, I wanted to compare this unit to another just to kind of get a sense of, you know, where it might fit into the game and if we're really on base here. And I wanted to look at the Berserk and how the Berserk fared against the same units. And the reason I chose the Berserk was because it's also an infantry unit that's doing anti-cavalry damage. And now you can pause the screen, take a look at the numbers, but let me just actually break all this down for you. To summarize this, Berserks actually are better against cavalry and camels, and they also defeat heavy infantry a lot more easily because you have a bit more HP, but mainly it's because you have a lot higher base melee damage. On the other hand, the Tedzreli swordsmen have that bonus resistance to anti-infantry, so Berserks are going to die pretty hard to things like hand cannoneers or slingers, but not the case, right, for our unit here for the Georgians. Also, you got to remember that the Georgians' bonus armor and damage is implicit in the unit itself, whereas Vikings have to research chieftains to get that, and that's a pretty expensive upgrade. And lastly, the faster movement speed, right, can kind of help you avoid fights that you don't want to take. So again, we have a comparison between the two units that perform something of a similar role, and yet we can see, right, that they each have their own distinct advantages and disadvantages, and I think that actually works. So if we look at the unique technologies here, right, the Castle Age tech is Holy Possessions, and this is a really interesting one because basically when your enemies garrison relics in the monastery, it actually provides some gold to the Georgian player, right? And this is gold in addition to what your adversary is getting. So relics produce 30 gold per minute. So what Georgians are they're going to receive their own 15 gold per minute, right? It's not being taken away from their opponent. It's just that Georgians are going to be getting something extra. Now, the historical logic is that the Georgians actually did collect quite a bit of relics and held many of them abroad. So that's what we're trying to get. And the real takeaway here in terms of implications is that it creates a trade-off, right? Do you garrison relics and allow your Georgian opponent to benefit? Or do you starve yourself of gold, but also starve the Georgians? And the way that this works, if we take a look at the relic advantage post-Holy Possessions, we can see what the math basically looks like on this. And so, right, to start with the easiest one, if the Georgians have 5 relics and the opponents have 0, there is no change. They just have a 5-0 relic advantage. However, if the Georgians have 4 and the opponents have 1, it's actually equivalent to as though the Georgians had 4.5 relics to 1. Again, if the Georgians have 3 and the opponents have 2, basically you're getting double the relic gold income. And if the Georgians have 2 but the opponents have 3, you're actually still going to be ahead in relic gold income, right? We can see basically, right, the takeaway here is that if Georgians can collect at least 2 relics, you're going to get that advantage in relic gold, right? So, and that's of course assuming that, you know, your opponent actually has those relics garrisoned, but even if they didn't, you're just going to have, okay, a 2-0 relic advantage. So basically, right, if you can get 2 relics, you're going to enjoy an advantage in relic gold production, which is not a bad bonus, especially for a civ that doesn't really have any economic bonuses outside of like a couple of hundred extra food right at the start of feudal age that you also need to collect. Now in the Imperial Age, the unique technology is Kamali swords, and this allows the swordsman line to attack a lot faster, right? I'm showing the rate of fire here, what it breaks it down to, and I'll run you through some of the numbers on this. But basically, right, the Georgians actually had a pretty unique sword design that they used. If you take a look at pictures of units that are, you know, sort of meant to kind of show what, say, Georgian soldiers look like, right? You can see that, and the implication really here is that you get top 10, or really maybe top 5 swordsmen, maybe even top 2 swordsmen. However, you got to remember, right, this is only affecting basically the champion line. And so to really think about where the numbers factor in here, right? If we take a look at the DPS, right, Georgian champions are doing 13.6 damage per second, which is really good. Now, if we look at some of the other top champions out there, right? Slavs post Georgina, the story is basically that Slavs post Georgina have a higher potential for DPS. It really just depends on how many units they're doing trample damage against, right? Once Slavs are attacking a unit and trampling at least 2, they're actually doing more DPS. Now, if we look at Dravidians post-Woot Steel, they do about 13 DPS to Cavalier and Paladin, and then about 12.5 to other champions. Right? Japanese are clocking in at 11.3, and the Aztecs Burmese are around, say, like the 10 DPS mark. Now, the big takeaway, though, to when we think about this comparison is you got to remember, all of these other Civ bonuses are applying to all of the infantry, whereas for the Georgians, remember, it's just the champion line. And also consider the fact that Burmese and Japanese are getting their bonuses for free, and it's applying even earlier in the game at times. So again, right, you got to remember, this is not only is it just a late game technology, but it's only affecting your swordsmen. And if you take a look at the cost, and that is factoring in the Imperial Age cost discount, it's still very expensive to get to. So if we take a look at the archery range here, we see you have a decent range, but, well, it's not spectacular in that you're missing arbalists and you're missing hand cannons. Now, you do have skirmishers, which is nice, but really if you're going to be making a unit from the archery range, you might think about going cavalry archers, right? It's not fully upgraded. You don't get Parthian tactics, which is a pretty important tech. However, you're going to be benefiting from the extra HP in Castle Age and Imperial Age from the Georgian bloodlines. You're also going to be benefiting from their team bonus. And remember, it's going to be a lot easier to get these guys upgraded in the late game as well. So to do a little point of comparison here with some other cav archers, we take a look at the Castle Age, that extra 5 HP. In a 20-on-20 battle, right, you can defeat generic, fully upgraded Castle Age cav archers with, let's just say about a quarter of your HP remaining, and you actually win versus Mongol cav archers because you're able to tank that extra hit, right? Now, the unit does usually lose to, say, Vietnamese heavy cav archers, though the fights sometimes go either way. All this is to say is that if you want to play cav archers in the mid-game, it can actually be a pretty effective composition. So again, you have another unit other than, say, shock cavalry. You can go cav archers if you want to try and play a bit more of an offensive style in the mid game to buy time to get to the late game. And now if we take a look at the heavy cavalry archer, right, again, we see that against equivalent heavy cav archers, you win with about more like 30% of your HP remaining. You still win versus Mongol heavy cav archers. It's normally a losing fight against Vietnamese heavy cav archers. Sometimes you might be able to win, but the real big takeaway here is that you do lose versus fully upgraded heavy cav archers, right? So if you're up against, say, like Saracens or Japanese, right, that's going to be a winning fight for them because they get Parthian tactics and have that 6 pierce armor. So your heavy cavalry archers in the Imperial Age will be good. However, against some of the top heavy cav archer civs, you're going to lag behind just a little bit. So you want to keep that in mind, right? It's not a perfect unit. If we take a look at the barracks here, again, we're fully upgraded, but really what you want to remember here is that there's not really any bonuses affecting your infantry until you get to the Imperial Age, where you can get your halberdier and all your champion upgrades at a discount, but really the main thing for performance is Kamali swords, but again, just remember, it's only affecting the swordsman line. Now, if we take a look at the stable, right, again, the story here is your scouts are going to be pretty weak in the early game. Remember, you're not really having any great bonuses. A little bit of extra food is going to maybe help you get out a scout, but probably just really help you more with like keeping, a balance between military production and town center production, at least for a few minutes there in the early game. But once you start getting into that mid to late game, now you're really starting to get a benefit out of it. And remember, Hussar, Cavalier, and Manaspa are all cheaper. And also remember that you do have Castle Age Camel Riders that are going to have 5 more HP in the Castle Age. Now you miss Heavy Camel, so you don't really have that in the late game. But if you do want a defensive unit, again, if you want to play a more defensive playstyle with the Civ, you can think about Camels in Castle Age. Again, to buy yourself time. Now, if we take a look at some of the comparisons here, right, with your shock cavalry and your hussars, the story is that you tend to defeat generic versions of the unit from anywhere from, let's say, about an average of like 13 to 14% of your HP remaining. It's worth noting in Age that fights often tend to snowball, so this is not I would say a major victory, but it's enough to get there, right? It just shows you that even 5 or 10 HP can actually give you decent performance, even if it's not, say, game breaking. And now when it comes to the hussars, right, you do pretty well versus generic hussars. It's a draw versus tatters that have the extra melee armor. It is worth noting that you lose to a lot of the other top hussar civs like Mongols or Malian Lightcav, Bulgarians, etc. So again, keep that in mind. Your hussars will be good. The extra HP is nice. You get all your pierce armor upgrades, so you'll be pretty tanky against archers. But if you're trying to fight against other hussars, top hussar civs, you might want to factor in the difficulty of that map. Take a look at the Siege Workshop. Again, we have here a bit more of a defensively oriented Siege Workshop. But if you do want to research Onager or Capt Ram, you can do it for a little bit cheaper. And so that might help you, at least with the Onagers, maybe like play some defense against, I don't know, skirms or something. But you do have Arcans, which is nice. Your Blacksmith is fully upgraded, right? Gonna help that Imperial Power Spike. The dock is not that great. You're missing things like Shipwright, so probably don't play the Civ on water. Your University is quite good, but you are missing Bombard Tower. But remember, right, a lot of these technologies you're getting here are free. And remember, the Imperial Age technologies will be discounted, so getting to keeps, arrow slits, that kind of thing, right? It's gonna help you quite a bit. Monastery, you've got everything, and you have cheaper Imperial Age technologies, right? And so I think you can see, right, that if you get to the late game, all of a sudden you have some options with this. And the economy, right, to balance the fact that your early game economy is pretty weak, right, all the techs are available. Now, I'm thinking about strengths and weaknesses. What we see here, some really strong late game units, you have a good power spike, you have a clear strategy, but the way that you get to that strategy, right, is up for debate, right? Some games you might want to play a bit more defensive and buy time that way, and in some games you might decide that, hey, offense is the best defense, and try to use a little bit of advantage you have in the mid game to hold off an opponent so you can get to your strong late game. And this Civ also has pretty good trash wars potential, I gotta say, with your skirmishers are good, your halbs are at least fully upgraded, and you have nice hussars. Now, in terms of weaknesses, your economy is weak, you get off to a slow start even from a military perspective, and because you have a clear strategy, that means your opponent also knows where your potential lies. And so your opponent's going to try to stop you. And because of that, right, even though you have some more population efficient units in the mid game with knights and cav archers with a little bit of extra HP, if you don't have the economy behind it and you don't properly macro, then at the end you might wind up feeling like you actually don't have the resources to create those units. So you're going to have to be careful. Now, I want to talk about some ideas that I got rid of, but that I actually considered, and I'll tell you why I got rid of them. So I had this idea for a Georgian sheepdog, right? But I just decided that I just couldn't find a way to balance it. I thought about replacing it for the scout, but scouts are so useful in the early game that it was kind of a nerf. And I thought about maybe being an addition to the scout, but it was just too strong. And I really wanted the Civ to not have any enduring economic bonuses. So, but because, the shepherding in the region's really good, I felt like they needed like something. Just like a small early game bonus that's pretty modest. And I just couldn't figure out then what to do with the sheepdog after, the early game. I thought about giving them maybe a bit better of an economic bonus that would have its impact more in the mid game, but I just thought it was too passive of a buff. And I want the civilization to struggle economically in the mid game and be more of a civ that relies on the tenacity of its military to try to survive, or is relying on the defensive structures to survive, and not so much its economy. I thought about making herdables unacquirable with this Civ, but I just felt like they get lame, so that's not gonna work. Going into more, I thought about free heresy, and I don't know, as you can see, I had a number of reasons, some concerns about balance. I liked the idea of some of the other free technologies, but really ultimately, end of the day, to incorporate the sort of religiosity element, I just thought the relic themed bonus fit the history more and was really interesting as well. And I also thought free heresy might create kind of this, idea that that the Georgians maybe were like religiously intolerant. And I don't know, I just didn't like the idea of that because I'm not sure that that's really historically accurate either. Again, obviously Christianity is part of the identity, but, I don't think it's, I don't know. I just didn't like the idea of that. So I nixed free heresy. And I thought about access to Parthian tactics. Now, I got rid of this because I thought the HP advantage was good enough. And given that you're getting so many cheap upgrades in Imperial Age, I didn't want the civilization to become cav archer focused, right? I think that a civ like, say, Bulgarians is a nice comp in some ways. And the Bulgarians really are a cavalry. I mean, they're a cavalry and infantry civ too, actually, right? But Bulgarians are pretty nice cav archers. They're not perfect, but they're nice. Now, I think Georgian cav archers are better than Bulgarians because you get a nice Castle Age bonus, an Imperial Age bonus with the HP. You can upgrade them cheaper, right? You're just missing Parthian tactics, whereas Bulgarians do have Parthian tactics. So I just thought here that it's better just give them the last armor, and you have the really strong skirmishers then to support your heavy cavalry in the late game, and I think that's kind of a better deal. And when it comes to the bloodline bonus, I really thought about just staggering bloodlines, so that in the late game it's 30, but that you could have a little bit more HP in feudal age. However, I went away from that because I just making the numbers kind of even was important to me. And if you do it like 10, 20, 30, and it's like, yeah, your feudal age is okay, but then you wind up having generic knights, camels, light cav, CA, etc. And again, given the fact that I went away from a mid-game economic bonus and more on saying, hey, here's a more like population efficient unit for you to try to fight with in the mid-game, I think that they need some kind of advantage, and I think being generic just doesn't cut it for me. Okay, so now that we've talked about the discarded ideas, I actually want to compare my civ concept with some others. I tried not to read too many other civilization concepts in detail because I didn't really want to be biased all that much. And I know that I did read one, of course, because one of the ways that I got this idea to do this video is because I had replied to somebody's Georgian civ concept on a AOE2 subreddit post, I think. And when I went to go find it, because the person replied to me, I couldn't find it because there were so many Georgian civ concepts. So there's just a ton out there. And so it'd be probably hard to actually read all of them thoroughly. And I didn't want to, though later on after doing this video, I tried to find some and really kind of read them. And I know that there's some people out there who, have things like, the Golden Glory mod, I think, have one. And I had talked about that with Iron Kaiser on his channel. And I think my civ concept differs pretty substantially in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of others out there. And I'll put a link to some of the YouTube channels, at least, that do some civ concepts, because there's some great ones out there. Like, I think Mantis AOE and like Robbie Lava, they just have great civ concepts on their channels. And so I wanted to kind of just, maybe compare mine with those, and then some others that are out there on, like, say, like the AOE2 subreddit. So really just kind of take a look at the similarities. We all kind of built these civs, pretty much all the civs are built around delayed gratifications, right? There's a lot of agreement on that, a lot of agreement on shock cavalry, fortifications, and then incorporating somehow the sort of religiosity of the kingdom. Now, there's some notable differences. One is how to get to the mid game. You see some, just a variety, right? Some people look at the civ more offensively, more defensively. You actually see some civilizations that maybe have a bit more of an eco bonus. And my view on this was that, because of what I understand to be a reputation for martial valor, I really wanted that to be the way that they got through the mid game. And so, you get through it by fighting, in a lot of sense, or being able to play defensive as well, right? Even though you're still fighting, you're just playing defensively. So the idea is, somewhere between like fortifications and then population efficient gold units, but not really with much eco. And so again, the whole idea with delayed gratification is that you have a strategy, but the tactics or even sort of the objectives that you take to get there, right, are going to be kind of variable. And even though we all agree on the importance of shock cavalry to the Civ, the alternative power units are kind of all over the place. When it comes to cav archers, some people have them getting fully upgraded cav archers. Some people even theme the civilization a lot more around them, giving special bonuses. And there are other Georgian Civ concepts out there where the cav archers are you don't even have access to heavy cav archer. The presence of step lancers is a major difference across a lot of videos. The role of infantry differs quite a bit. Whether your shock cavalry is coming from castles or stables, so the Monaspa is a pretty common unique unit here that we tend to see, but a lot of people have it as a castle unit. And then getting it from the stable, I think, is probably one of the more unique things about the way I do it. Now, I will say that for me, I really wanted to incorporate cav archers, in part because one of the things that I did read about was that one of the great military reforms actually involved the sort of invited settlement of a lot of human Kipchaks into the region. And so I thought that they'll bring some of that flavor. But I thought that that would help with the cav archers. And since humans get step lancer, you might say, okay, well, they'd also have step lancers, but I don't know. I just feel like step lancers are more for just these step civs. And even though you have some Kipchaks coming into the area, I think that you kind of want to pick and choose whether you want step lancers or cav archers. And I just wanted to go the cav archer route. And the other big difference is economically, right? There's a number, there's kind of two camps. There's those of us who really didn't want them to have very much economy, and then there's others who want to give them a bit more economy, so that, because there's really two ways you can kind of get to the mid game, right? One is to do it militarily, and the other is to turbo through and use your economy, right? And so you just economically get up faster. Again, I'm not saying there's a right way. I'm just saying that we all kind of have different views of this. My answer was to think about it militarily, also building in the fortifications into that aspect of it. Some people want a more economic route, and that's fine too, right? It's I'm not saying one's right, but there are different sort of philosophies about the Civ. So, in conclusion, right, when it comes to the Georgians, right, you have a pretty clear strategic focus. If you're going to play them on open maps, right, you do run a risk, though. Again, so the idea, right, is really just about how you survive. The risk in the early to mid game on your open maps is you're going to get outproduced from a military perspective, right? Basically, you take too much damage in the early game, and you just don't make it, right, to where you want to get to. And now, you have some aspects to try to mitigate that, right? The extra herdables can kind of help you, mitigate your sort of weak early game. You have population efficient units. You have the defensive upgrades that are going to help out quite a bit. So, but again, you do run a risk there. Now, on closed maps, right, on the one hand, the risk here is actually more of getting outboomed, right? Because, again, you don't have a great economy in the mid game. Again, your defensive structures might help you. You have some siege options that might help you. And being able to utilize that Castle Age unique tech on a closed maps like Arena can be really strong, I think, here. And lastly, right, the cheaper Imperial Age techs, that means that once you do get to that Imperial Age, then maybe you can get your units upgraded faster than your opponent, and all of a sudden you can kind of bring yourself back in the game. So, again, the risk is just getting outboomed economically for your closed maps. So, the thing is, though, is that it's not necessarily straightforward how you're going to reach the late game, right? On the one hand, if you take that more aggressive approach and you don't inflict enough casualties on your opponent, all of a sudden, right, you're behind from an eco perspective, and it can be very difficult to battle back in the game. On the other hand, if you play really passively and you just turtle up, right, you're not going to have the economy to outdo other civs. And so basically, right, they hit their stride in Imperial Age, and you just get overrun before you can get your units out in the field. So there's not one sort of like golden ticket answer here. And that's what I think actually makes this civilization a great one to play, right? I think that games with the Georgians can have a lot of unique aspects. I think you could see a lot of tension, right? Trying to say, like ward off, the power of the Georgian late game. But you do have a number of tools with the Georgians to be able to get to that late game, right? Even though it's not perfect, right? You have enough tools. The question is, can you just implement them effectively? And ultimately, I think that's what we want in a new civilization. So, it's like I said at the beginning of this video, right? I hope you enjoyed it. This was fun to go through. And if you did like it, you're here at the end, like, comment, subscribe. And if you don't want to do it for me, then do it for the Hussars guys. That being said, right, like I said, hope you enjoyed this, and I'd love to do another one of these if the interest is there. Maybe leave a comment if there's a civ that you'd like to see covered. I already have a few in mind, but maybe I haven't thought through all of them. So how about you let me know? And with that being said, right, James 59, and I'll see you guys up in the ladder. Peace.